Our club is really pleased to present Jim McCormack's discussion about moth photography tonight. Jim has been acknowledged as one of Ohio's best nature photographers through a Columbus Monthly article that was recently published. He's got a blog spot with over 30,000 subscribers, and he's able to produce photographs that make moths just a very relatable subject for people. And his own sense of wonder and curiosity about nature photography, birds, insects, and other kinds of wildlife, it has inspired photographers all over Ohio and beyond. Jim, did you want to talk about the book that you'll have coming out soon?
I will in the talk, sure.
Okay. All right.
Good. Well, thank you, Kathy, and thanks, Donna, both of you for having me. Let me attempt to get this thing going here. Hopefully there'll be no glitches. Okay. Just bear with me.
I think if you click on the top left where it says from beginning, there you go.
Okay. Does that look good?
Yeah.
Just one picture? Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks again for having me, Kathy, Donna. I appreciate it. I always like talking to the club. It's been a number of times now. And this is probably one of the stranger talks the club might have had in a while. I don't know. There probably aren't too many moth photography talks, but you're going to get one, sort of. I give a lot of talks, but I don't almost ever even mention how I made the photos, because frankly, most people don't care where I'm giving these talks, which is fine. But it is fun to talk shop, sort of. And that's what I'm going to do, at least interspersed throughout this talk. Yesterday, I was down in Southern Ohio, and I'm going to start with that. A few pictures. I'm a botanist. I spent a good chunk of my career as one, and plant photography is something I still love, and just seeing plants. I mean, especially after a long winter, which all of ours are. So yesterday in Scioto County or Adams County, Ohio, it was just starting to happen. The spring beauties were out and whatnot, but it's still, even down there, very early. The earliest things are just starting to come on, and the woodland forest floors still look pretty vacant when you look at them like that. But you know, the leading edge of the spring wildflowers is thoroughly out, like hepatica, like that, and plenty of bloodroots. They're almost peak bloom now, one of only 2 native poppies that we have in Ohio. But I was there for rare things. Usually when I go on these missions, I have some rare target in mind, but of course look at everything, even the common things. And that was the rarity. So that was early yesterday morning. Unfortunately, this lily, which is very rare everywhere, not just Ohio, is photosensitive. So being the early bird, like I usually like to be, does you no good, because it won't be open. They open about 10 or 11 in the morning, depending on how much sun's getting to them. But we went back later that day, and voila, there it was. That's the golden star lily that's endangered in Ohio. Really, essentially one population in the state, but there in Rocky Fork, that drainage, it blooms by the tens of thousands. It could even be hundreds of thousands, but that's it. Really strange distribution. So that was a success. It was looking good. You only have a week to see it. It's a mass synchronous blooming and then busting. So a week later, they're all done. So you'd want to go in the next couple of days if you want to see it. But then we went on. I met some friends that are from Cincinnati, good photographers. And so it was a photo intensive mission. And we found other rarities. This is Walter's violet, and just starting to bloom. It's the smallest of our several dozen violets in Ohio, and another state endangered species of prairies. But we were really after 2 little elfins that not many people would probably be after. This is one of them. This is called a Wedgweaved Whitlow grass. It's a tiny mustard. It's only 2 to 3 inches tall. So like all good photographers, we're laying on the ground a lot because you want to be on your subject's level. And we were looking at that, and then growing as a companion with it was this species. It's called Michaud's Glade Cress, another little mustard. Again, we're talking a few inches for a really big one. But being down on the ground like that allowed my buddy Glenn to spot something crawling by. And it was this beautiful little caterpillar on the ground. And I happen to know what that one was. It's a moth. I'll show you what it becomes in a minute. But that's yesterday's photo. So this cat, you can't get away. It's a moth caterpillar. So this segues into the talk because you can't get away from moths no matter what you do, where you go. And I'll show you why later. But this beautiful little caterpillar overwinters as a caterpillar, which a fair number of them do. So it had just become active and it was crawling around looking for its larval host plants, which are members of the aster family in this case. And we disrupted it slightly so we could take photos. And then if all goes well for it later, it becomes that. It's called a Locust haploa moth. Just one of many, many striking moth species that we have in Ohio. So it is not hard to find these things at all. Well, I'm a big believer in putting photos to work, and really I'm probably more of a utilitarian photographer because I usually have missions or things in mind for these photos, or a lot of them, not all of them. I'll take pictures no matter what, but this book, it's in press through Ohio University Press with my co-author, who's Chelsea Gottfried, who is also a very good photographer, but it's going to be out next, probably late winter, over 600 photos in it. And you might think, why would I want to garden for moths? Well, same reason you'd want to garden for butterflies, except you have a lot more subjects to garden for here. And there's a lot of sound ecological reasons to protect moths and encourage them, which I'll touch on here in a little bit. But this was the byproduct of probably about 20 years now of moth photography, because I've been into them that long, longer probably, but and there's photos probably going back even close to 20 years in this book, although much are more recent. So it was a good outlet for myself and Chelsea also to use some of our moth photos and all the nighttime work we've done to get those. That's the range of the book. It covers a broad area. You know, flora and fauna are political boundaries mean absolutely nothing to a moth, a deer, birds, especially, and plants. That's just all human compartmentalization for political purposes. So we weren't going to just limit this to Ohio. That area in orange is pretty much mostly the same plant communities. They start to really shift when you get much outside of that range. And moths depend on certain plants, so that's why we chose what we chose there. Plus, we can sell more books in different places. Anyway, I got into moths back when I was an actively collecting botanist. So I've made, I don't know, 10,000, 9,000 specimens probably over the years. And these are all in institutions like Ohio State or University of Michigan or wherever they were. But on one of those collecting trips, this is going back a long time. This is over 20 years ago for sure. I found a new population of that plant, which is very rare, pretty much everywhere. So I documented it by taking a collection, a voucher, we call it, and took it back to the office. And there I was going to press it and dry it, so it's a good specimen for all of eternity, hopefully. But anyway, there was a caterpillar on it. And I just thought to myself, you know, that is a really rare plant and a rare habitat. Stands to reason this moth caterpillar is probably rare as well. And there it is. It doesn't really even have a common name, but it's a big, striking lime green caterpillar. And the only two photos I had to borrow for this talk, by the way, are this one and one other caterpillar. I'll show you who David Wagner is here in a second. But I gave that to an entomologist friend of mine. The caterpillar, he successfully raised it, which is a miracle in itself, if you understand how these things work. But and that's what it turned out to be, because it was not identifiable as a caterpillar. And it was the first Ohio record, and I think at the time only the third record ever. So they were very, very excited by this. And I was excited. And that led to this lifelong, so far, infatuation with moths, especially butterflies too. There's David Wagner, who I just mentioned. Many years later, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was able to take him to a big patch of glade mallow, which he had never seen here in Ohio. And within 5 minutes, we probably had 16 caterpillars. And he took them back to his lab at the University of Connecticut and raised them and documented the entire life cycle for that species, which hadn't been done. So that was pretty cool. And that's his book. If you want a cool book and you want to learn more about larvae, that's the book to get right there. It's wonderful, amazing photos all through it and good information. All right, so I don't want to totally dismiss butterflies, but I'm going to just show you why I'm totally dismissing butterflies for this talk and our book. Everyone likes them. They're conspicuous diurnal, flying during the day, so easy to see. There's been about 140 species in Ohio. That counts really rare things that have only shown up once or twice. So if you're really active in that world, you could go out and find maybe 100 or something like that in a year if you really worked at it. So that's what you got with butterflies. They are cool. Those are all tiger swallowtails, by the way, just different color forms and sexes. And there's the caterpillar of the tiger swallowtail, which is a wonderful tree snake mimic, fabulous animal. And all butterflies are fabulous. But when we look at moths, there are 2,000 or so species known, absolutely known in Ohio. And the micro Lepidopteran experts, that's the small, really small moths that are really understudied. They think that if you could find all of those, it would be more like 4,000 species. So compare that, let's just say 2,000, what we know now, to 140 butterflies. There's way, way, way more of these things. They're incredibly important ecologically. And I'm just going to touch on one component of that later in this talk. So anyway, into the photos and the photography. I say this probably every time I give one of these talks because it's so true. If you're into nature or natural history photography like I am, the more you know about your subjects, and there's a lot to know about, the better you'll be. You'll understand where to find them, their behavior, and little nuances far better. And it's just infinitely helpful with shooting these subjects. So moths, there's one big thing we probably all know regarding that, and they're mostly nocturnal, but they're not exclusively nocturnal. So this has to change your modus operandi to evenings and shooting under cover of darkness. But there are plenty of exceptions. This is a yellow-collared skate moth that is diurnal. It's a lightning bug mimic. There's a lot of crazy mimicry in this world. And you see them out with the butterflies on flowers during the day, just as this one is. Many of us know this, at least. There's 2 species in Ohio. The snowberry clearwing is kind of a sphinx moth, but they're diurnal and look like little hummingbirds darting around the flowers. Easy to see that way. Although, notice the shutter speed, 5,000th of a second. You generally don't have to use shutter speeds like that with moths. These ones you do. That was no flash, by the way, though. Here's the other species that we have, also in the day, and that was shot with flash, just using the sync speed of the camera, the fastest it'll fire with the flash on, without going into high-speed sync, which I don't like to do with these. So 1/200th of a second, and those don't freeze the wings even yet. So anyway, those are out during the day, but most are not. Most you have to go out at night and really look for these things specifically. And not many photographers do. It's a growing number, but it's still, I would say, a bit of a Wild West if you want to get images of really cool things that not many people are going to have. That's a Pawpaw Sphinx. It only eats pawpaws. I'm also going to talk about the caterpillars because they're part and parcel of the package of a moth. Moths are 4-part life cycles: eggs, cocoon, caterpillar, adult. And the larvae are often better looking than what they become. I mean, look at that. That's, it's kind of cool looking. It's big. Look at that. That's the caterpillar. It's just amazing. And they're really, really fun to capture. So cameras and lenses. I I use a couple things. This is I'm a Canon person. I don't get into, I don't really care, personally what people use, because it's much more the photographer, and all these cameras are so good now, these makes of cameras. But I've used Canon a long time. That's the 5D Mark IV. That's one of them. It's a full frame sensor, though. That's definitely better for this stuff, if you can get one. And that's the new R5. That's my other workhorse. That's Canon's newest iteration of mirrorless cameras, and it's really amazing. So those would be the bodies. That's my workhorse lens, and it is for most people who do this. It's a 100 millimeter macro, just superb lens. Nikon has that beautiful 105 macro. Anything like that is really good for this sort of work. And then sometimes I trot out that's the 180 macro, more of a telephoto macro, and I don't use it that much on Moths, but it's a pretty amazing lens because of its sharpness. So those would be the two prime culprits for me. But I really want to reinforce this. You don't need stuff like that to do Moths well. They're very approachable. You're going to be right on them. That's a Panasonic. So way back, I haven't had a point and shoot camera in a long time, but back when I did, it was the early generations of those Lumix Panasonics, and they have Leica glass. They're kind of legendary for their macro capabilities. But anything like that, just a point and shoot, you're going to do really well with this. It's not like shooting birds here. Flash is the other big ingredient. It's absolutely vital to use it, in my opinion. Just lighting them with a flashlight and shooting, that's not going to be that pleasing. It can be done, but just a pop-up flash, if that's what your camera has, that's fine. You can play with that and do some tweaks to the light and whatnot, and really get good results out of just a built-in flash. But usually if people get hard into this, they want to diversify their light source and make it more functional and adjustable. And that would mean speed lights like that. That's Canon 600 speed light. That would be one of my workhorses for this. And there's aftermarket ones too that'll fit anything with a hot shoe at least. But that's probably the main workhorse for me for Moths, and that's Canon's twin lights. Nikon makes a really nice set, and you can get these for any SLR camera, mirrorless camera. And now it's really adjustable because our dual light sources sit out at the front of the lens and can be adjusted to light directly in front of the lens, so you can be right on top of something. They're very adjustable. Many things you can do with this. Plus they have those little pre-lights. So if you half tap the shutter, a little beam comes out of each one, and you don't need anyone's help with a flashlight to find your subject. You can work in complete darkness, completely solo with that. And then diffusion is a big thing. Some of us are on constant quests for the best diffusion of light, and it gets pretty fancy. I just got these for my twin lights, and I tested them yesterday for the very first time. Those two little mustards I showed you, they were shot with flash, which I normally don't like on plants at all, but with these diffusers, and I really like the results preliminarily. So I'm excited about that. And then this rig, it's called an AK diffuser. Just Google it, you'll go right to the guy's site. But that looks clunky, but it's flyweight. It's not that clunky. It's certainly not heavy. And the quality of diffusion out of that is pretty amazing. Oftentimes with a polarizing filter on the lens and polarizing tape inside of that across the flash head light source. And then there's a few other tricks as well. So it's like this perpetual quest for no glare whatsoever. But Moths generally don't glare that badly anyway, so it's not that hard to do. So this is typical camera settings. In my world, at least, of being only an intermediate techno head about this stuff, I really don't like to think a lot about camera settings constantly. I want to find what works, and I want to stick with that and focus on my subjects, finding them, getting them into a good position, and all that stuff, and just know that my camera is going to perform when I want it to, and I hit the shutter. And this is pretty much walk around settings, very low ISO. I'm using the sync speed of the camera. We're not talking high speed burst mode here, anything like that, or high speed sync, because the thing's moving so quick. They're usually not moving. 1/200 or 250 is fine. And then a small aperture. F16 is my favorite, and I don't deviate a lot from that because I want a fair bit of depth of field. And that's true with insect photography in general. Flash on, I always, never on manual, it's always on TTL through the lens metering. So it's talking to my camera body via a little pre-flash, and it's the camera's adjusting accordingly, and they're syncing with each other, and it's fairly bulletproof. It's and then if I do have to make light adjustments for whatever factor, I do it off the flash usually. Then I can keep all those other settings the same, and I just turn the flash up or down on the head, the head of the speed light. It's very easy. So now I'm set. I really don't have to worry much about that stuff. Much more of a worry is finding your subjects. This is a very nocturnal activity in general, and the common way to attract moths is to put up a sheet or use a white wall. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. And then light it up. And you want special lights too, not just any light. The middle light is a mercury vapor light. They're pretty costly, but highly, highly efficient because, and then the other light, the purple one on the left, that's a UV light or a black light basically. And moths see into those light spectra in ways that we don't, and it really
Mercury vapor
attracts.
lights, black lights are best to attract moths on a
What's
white
that?
sheet.
Oh, I'm sorry. So anyway, those are the best light setups, one of each usually. Some moths will come to the black light, they won't come to the other, vice versa. But you'll find them if they're out there. Just a regular like light for your lamp or something, that's not going to be nearly as effective as this. So that's what we do. And we get ourselves in good habitat. You know, downtown Columbus would not be very good for this. You want a lot of native plants because the caterpillars eat native flora. So the better the plant diversity and nativity, the better the moth populations will be. Then there's one other tactic too that we often employ, but not always, and that's baiting. Some moths don't come to lights. No one's sure why. We've all heard the thing, a moth to a flame. Well, I can tell you, no one knows exactly why they come to lights. It's a bit of a mystery, and it's probably compound reasons, but some don't come to lights anyway, like this horrid Zowie. That's the name of this one. And it's coming to bait. And bait is a really good mix here. Is take a milk jug empty and put flat beer in it, a bunch of brown sugar and rotten bananas, and just shake it up really good and let it sit out in the sun for 2 or 3 days. So it's really nasty, and then just throw it on the tree. And you'll be amazed at what comes to that. And sometimes, you know, you don't even need to do anything in certain areas. That on the left is a famous outhouse down on the New River in West Virginia. And it was great. You know, it was they don't have that light there anymore, unfortunately, but they used to leave that on all the time, which frankly is not that good for moths, but that's what they did. And anytime you went over there at night, there were lunas and all kinds of other stuff sitting around. And you didn't have to do anything. Even your house lights, like that other photo, that's a chickweed geometer on my old house's front light. You know, they'll come to those too. Sometimes you walk out your door, there's a really cool moth there and you can shoot it. But we really want to target them with the sheet setup that I showed you earlier. You know, that's the way to get mass quantities. Sometimes though, you just find them during the day, just sitting around like that. This is a Luna moth that had just emerged, probably within 12 hours of this, and it was drying itself off in Shawnee State Forest on the vegetation. Somehow I saw it. So you do run into them just here and there without even trying or looking. So another important element with all kinds of photography, but moths too, is bokeh, the quality of the background. So the simplest way to do that, especially since you're out at dark, is just a pure black bokeh. And it always looks pretty good. Gets a little monotonous maybe after a while if that's all you do, but there's a red hump caterpillar moth that I had moved off a sheet, and I'll show you how you do that, and put it on a broken off twig, because it is a broken off twig mimic. Good luck finding that during the day. It's going to be sitting on a twig and you'll never see it like that. But to create a bokeh is so simple with flash. You can do it day or night, and it just involves the use of flash a small aperture works better, which I'm already at f16. And then you don't want anything within a foot or 2 feet or whatever, a couple feet behind your subject, and you're going to end up with a solid black background. That works during the day too. So that's simple. We're doing that anyway if we're out there at night. You can do other things though. This is a
Wow, Delaware lake.
Someone's not muted. Sorry. Anyway, this was done. This is a Supropia moth that I found on.
And I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for one sec?
Sure.
Guys, I keep trying to keep tabs on this. We're on full screen and I don't have everybody's thing listed, but please make sure you stay unmuted. Jim, I'm really sorry to interrupt your talk.
Oh, they want to stay muted, probably, not unmuted.
I meant muted.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I don't care.
You stay unmuted. Everybody else stay muted.
Oh,
All right, thank you. And I apologize, Jim, for interrupting.
no, no problem. It's not a big distraction at all. Anyway, we found this during a daytime trip. And that's another tactic too that's super cool with flash. So I used flash on this, even though it was broad daylight, sunny. That's the sky in the background. So just get yourself down where you have blue sky and you're going to end up with this beautiful blue bokeh. Kind of unnatural looking, but I thought it looked cool and complemented the colors of the caterpillar. So that's why I did it that way. More often though, if we really want to create bokeh, and this typically involves moth caterpillars far more than it does the adult moths, but we use bokeh sheets. And I usually in my bag or whatever have a range of these in different colors, usually more muted natural tones. So all that brown background is a piece of paper where I took a blurry photo out of focus of just a bunch of brown vegetation and printed it out on stiff paper. That's all I do to make those. And that's so simple and really creates a nice, undistracting, often complementary background to your subject. But then, you know, still natural backgrounds are the best because to me, photography is all about storytelling. That's why I'm doing it. I want to relate messages. And what I just showed you looks cool, but it's not really relating messages. This one more is. So here's a giant Supropia moth, the biggest regularly occurring moth that we've got in Ohio. And it's on leaf litter. And that's where they rest during the day. So as big as that thing is, good luck spotting that when it's out on the forest floor on leaf litter. You won't probably until you've scared off and it startles you because it's so huge flying up at your feet. By the way, I should mention leaf litter has been around a long time. The angiosperm plants and then the deciduous trees evolved tens of millions of years ago, a long, long time ago. So ever since, animals have been evolving to capitalize on all that leaf litter strewn all over the world, wherever deciduous trees are. And moths, no one does it like moths. There's so many moths that are adapted to leaf litter in various ways. A really common way being they look like leaves. And during the day, they just sit on the leaf litter. So this was a hard shot to get, but there's 2 species of leaf litter moths that look so much like leaves sitting on the leaf litter. This is far more effective than any artificial bokeh would ever be to share the story of those species. The angel moths on the right, here's one up close. They're just so cool, crazy looking things. And they just sit like that all day. They become active at night, but you will not spot those, believe me, on the leaf litter until you scare them or something like that. But then you got characters like this. This is one of our silk moths, a small species, and it's pink and yellow. It's as garish as all get out. So if that was on leaf litter, it would, stick out from a mile away. Any other substrate for that matter. So you wonder, like, why would a rosy maple moth be pink and yellow? Then you see one sitting on fresh red maple samaras or seeds, and that's timed perfectly to the emergence of the moth in the spring. Then it makes sense. And they blend in really well, and you wouldn't see them sitting there probably. So those are natural bokehs that I tend to much prefer when I'm shooting things if I can do it. So handling moths is another important component. If you do this, even in your own backyard or at a moth sheet, anything like that, it's good to learn about these 2 rules, and they're simple. The smaller And the smoother or less hairy a moth is, the harder it will be to handle. They're virtually untouchable. As soon as you stick a finger near something like that, it flies off. That's it. Good luck. You're not going to handle it. The larger they become, and especially the furrier they become, and that's just, hairier, the easier they become to handle. And you can really move these things around pretty effectively and pose them on twigs or leaf litter or whatever it is that you know that they should be on, and then get your photo that way. So here's one that you could, it's really cool. Spun glass slug. We don't see that many of them, but it's on a white sheet, just shot where it came into our lit up sheet. And good, you're not going to move that. Believe me, I've tried a million times. You touch that, stick your finger near it, it's out of there. So you have to work with those on your own terms. However, bigger ones, hairier ones like this is a big Azalea Sphinx. Super simple. All you do usually is put your finger in front of it, give it a little prod from the back, and it just climbs right up on your finger and it's yours. You can put it wherever you want to. So why? Why would you want to relocate them? This is the main reason. And I'm being a little harsh on white sheets, but they kind of are the white sheets of photographic death. You don't want all your photos on a white sheet. And frankly, they're just completely unnatural. And it's just not the look that I'm going for, at least. Here's another little slug moth. Slug moths are really cool, very charismatic little moths. But there he is on a white sheet because I can't move him. That's where I had to get him. And even if you slide a leaf, try and slide a leaf under him and then get him up on the leaf, then move the leaf. Even that, it doesn't work well usually. It's just really hard to move these things. So you're stuck with that stark white background, if that's how you do it. Now, that's not to say that can't look bad, because I like this a lot, actually. It looks like it was shot in a white box. That's not a very common moth, the ruby tiger moth. And it was very complimentary to it. Now, I got to say, techno speak here, you really have to overexpose to do this. So, I was probably 2 1/3 stops up on my flash output to get the dark object well illuminated on a pale background. So, you always will have to step up your light output. At least that's my opinion of the best way to light them when they are on a white sheet, but that's easily figured out. So about the best you can do on a sheet is something like that. So these Haploa moths, this is the Clymene Haploa moth. There were 3 of them really close to each other on a white sheet, and I was able to herd them a little bit, and I got them all herded into a pleasing position and got that shot. But I wouldn't have been able to probably move them off the sheet. They would have just flown away from me. So you're very limited with white sheets. That's why we have learned a lot about the art of moving moths, for whatever that's worth. Here's a good example where it's handy, though. We had all these Sphinx moths one night on a sheet, and these are big charismatic species. And there were 8, as I recall, 8 species. And we managed to wrangle 5 of them and get them over on this wood wall that looked way more pleasing and kind of matched them to a degree, and put them all together and shoot pictures. This is a favorite shot doing that. This is a wall of fame of 6 really spectacular species that were on a sheet on a really, really busy night. All bigger, all hairier. They abided by that rule that I gave you of larger and fuzzier, easier to move. And, temporarily created this little wall and got them all in one shot. But more pragmatically, it's nice to be able to do that and know which moths, or have an idea of which moths that will work with, to do shots like this. These are Io moths. The male on the left is really commonly seen. The females we almost never see, and I don't know why that is. They just don't come to lights much or something. They're not rare. But one night, both sexes did appear at the sheet, and we were able to get them off and onto a little more pleasing environment, but more particularly get them right together so we could photograph the 2 sexes together, which is not an easy thing to do generally. I also like doing it with twig mimics, because I just find them spectacular. Lots of moths are wood or twig mimics, bark mimics. And so getting them off the sheet and onto an appropriate twig like this checker fringe prominent, you can get a really cool shot. Look at that one. I mean, this thing looks so much, it looks more like a broken off stub of a branch than a broken off branch looks like. And that's how they would rest and hide during the day. This is a wavy lined Hetero moth that has a lot of colors in its wings, the scales of the wings that match lichens really well. And actually, you know, when I put this thing on lichens, it ran right into the lichens. It just knows that's where it wants to be because that's where it would rest. This one takes the cake. If you can even see it, it's frame filling and it's the heads to the top, crystal clear. That's a white blotched heterocampa, which mimics moss. So mosses are big components of bark on trees, and they tend to have a greener, wetter look. So does the moth, and it just blends into a T. That one, I think it was the Toronto Botanical Garden got that one for me, and I don't know if it's still on exhibit up there, but it was for a while because they had some exhibit about animals mimicking plants. Tulip Tree Beauty, again, just filling the entire frame on the trunk of a tree. Good luck seeing that. So another thing, when you're confronted with lots of moths at a sheet, where several thousand might come in a good night, the perfect specimen, all right, like that. That's a female Polyphemus moth, and it's beautiful. These big silk moths don't last long, and this is probably less than a day out of the cocoon, and it's flawless. There's not a blemish on it. So that's great. And I'm guilty of looking for things like that, and that's what I want to shoot generally. This, though, tells a much greater story than the one I just showed you. This is the male Promethea moth, and look at those big chunks out of the wings. That's bat damage. There's this whole evolutionary warfare going on between bats and moths, with moths like that evolving wackily, crazily erratic flight. So when a bat comes after them, it's super hard for the bat to get the French fry in the middle. And oftentimes they don't. They just end up with chunks out of the wings. They miss the important part that they wanted. And that means the moth gets away. I actually saw that go down. This flew into our sphere of light with a bat hot on its heels and flew up under the eaves and landed right away. And those chunks had just been taken out of it. Some moths have evolved pseudo echolocation. They send out their own fake echolocation, which jams the real echolocation in the bat, and they thwart them that way. And there's other tricks too. It's really an amazing part of biological warfare. It's not that well known, but bats are important too. And there's a red bat in the spring about this time of year roosting in the old beech leaves. That's where you look for these. They're migratory, but of the dozen species of bats in Ohio, moths are their #1 food source, followed by beetles. So moths, adult moths, serve a really, really important function to one of our most interesting group of mammals, and one that's a group that's not doing all that well, as you probably know. So there's a Luna, again, perfection. I think I showed that picture already, but that's just as good as it gets, you know, fresh as can be, unblemished. But this one tells a greater story. Here's one that's really beaten up. There's probably a combination of definitely bats, because now it's been shown that those long tail streamers of a Luna, that's for thwarting bats, because when the bats come in on one of these, when it's flying, they key in on the tail streamers that are waving around in the breeze, and there you go, they're missing. Undoubtedly a bat got those, but didn't get the important part. So this thing, as beaten up as it is still free to reproduce. Plus it's just getting old. The scales are falling off. This is a silk moth. Silk moths have no functional mouth parts. They don't feed, and they live about a week. That's it. So it's a very short shelf life. This is a good rule of thumb, in my opinion, on anything at all to do with photography, no matter what your subject is. And don't take the conventional road, you know, look at things from all angles. And maybe you'll get something that no one's really shot or thought of, or some very strange interpretation. Anyway, I'm big on that with stuff, especially insects and moths especially. So here's your classic mug shot. This is another Io moth. By the way, those big eye spots are normally hidden when they're at rest. That's thought to be there for bird prevent being eaten by birds. So if a little chickadee or whatever pecks at that, the forewings are covering those. It just looks like a yellow wedge sitting there. But when bothered, it flicks the forewings open like a switchblade, and instantly those big scary eyes are exposed. And that's been shown. It scares birds off, you know. They'll go look for something easier. It's like a big monster. But anyway, that's your classic mug shot, you know, just top down, flat. And that's an angle you do always want to get with a moth, if no other reason for identification. But headshots are wonderful. These are just amazing little creatures when you look at them face first. Like this is another big silk moth, the regal moth. Look at that white flannel moth. When you start to look at some of these, you realize how they've been inspirations for horror movies. Mothra versus Godzilla, you know, a Japanese sci-fi movie. Certain evil connotations, Silence of the Lambs with Anthony Hopkins, where they used the Death Head's hawk image as a big source of imagery in that movie. Not pretty imagery either, and it's because of things like this. This is a really common species. This is a little bit cuter. This is a black wave flannel moth. Always makes for a good headshot. This is a buck moth, a specialist of oaks and oak forests, and they look pretty cute, like little teddy bears when you look at them face on. This is even cuter than that with its little bangs, white dotted, dot line white moth. This looks a little scarier, but that's the Isabella tiger moth. Its caterpillar is undoubtedly the best known caterpillar in North America. And believe me, most people don't know many caterpillars at all. And it goes by a different name than the adult moth. That's common in this world where the caterpillars have different names than what they become. And it's the good old woolly bear. That what we just saw is what it becomes if it makes it across the road and it grows up to be a moth. You can't beat Luna moths. So not only is that a cool angle to depict a Luna moth, tells you a lot. This is a male. And those fern-like antennae are full of sensory organs that detect pheromones. That's how they find each other. It's possible that a male Luna can pick up female pheromones, airborne pheromones from a mile away. And that's how it's doing it, is with those antennae. And finally, a little yellow-based tussock moth, kind of a not well-known moth, but it really, really looks cool. This is a male. Males tend to have much bigger antennae than females because they have to be loaded up with the pheromone sensors in their antennae. So caterpillars, I want to touch on them. Yeah, you can't get away from moths and caterpillars. They're intertwined. It's just different stages of that four-part life cycle. And some of those are amazing too. I'm going to show you some more, but again, looking at them oddly, you know, heads, tails, whatever. So this is a honey locust moth caterpillar coming right at you with those cool spines on top. This is underneath a caterpillar. That's a Polyphemus moth caterpillar, very big, and it shows how those feet work. This is why you can't knock a caterpillar off a branch once they latch on. Those little suction cup feet. And even the back end of a caterpillar. This is a Promethea moth caterpillar taken from the back end with its little smiley face. So Ohio 4, I want to talk just a little more about moths now, just how cool they are, and a little bit about why they're important, why we did a whole book on them. Ohio has about 1,800 native plant species, and probably every single one of them host caterpillars, butterflies being a minor part of that, moths being the majority of it. And this is the biggest group of herbivores that there is. And there's a really cool thing. So one of the kings of trees for supporting moths are oaks. A white oak alone can support about 500 species of moth caterpillars. And this is one of them, and it's really crazy looking. The white blotched Heterocampa, this is a big one. There's a maple specialist, only on maples. Maples support about half the number of species as oaks do, softer wooded plant. Green striped maple worm. This is one of the holy grails of moth caterpillars. This is the hickory horn devil. Here it's eating walnut. They also eat hickory and a few other things as well, but walnut and hickory are the big ones probably. This is the size of a hot dog. You can hear it crunching the foliage from 5 feet away. You could, I mean, it's just incredible to see one of these things. So a big differentiation, kind of a general one, though, with caterpillars are what they eat. Are they specialists or generalists? So this is a generalist. This is an Io moth caterpillar. I've shown you the adult. This is what the caterpillar looks like. It's really a nice looking bag of goo with the racing stripe down the side. Stings too. Good rule of thumb, if you go out and try this, if the caterpillar has spines, I wouldn't touch it, because a lot of times they're armament to protect it, and they have venom. They actually inject that venom into you. And this one does that, and you'll feel it. But this polyphagus just means many plants, and it does. This species probably eats over 100 different species of plants. That's not the norm. The norm tends to tilt more towards specialization, though, which is one plant the caterpillar can eat, or maybe a small group of plants. Here's an extreme specialist, and this is one of the coolest ones, the curve-lined owlet caterpillar, and it only eats greenbriers in the genus Smilax. Greenbriers are very common. The moth's probably not that common, but good luck finding it. The caterpillar's on the right. The thing on the left is an old withered leaf of the greenbrier. So when those leaves wither, they tend to crisp around the stem and just stay stuck on the stem. And the caterpillars evolved a remarkably similar look to that. So that's extreme specialization. By the way, that's Bokeh in the background, in the field. During the day, we found this, and I was carrying these in my pack and put that brown sheet of paper behind it and got that effect to isolate it from what would otherwise be a very busy background. And there's a close-up of the caterpillar again. So good is its camouflage as a dead leaf that if you blow gently on it, the caterpillar immediately starts slowly twisting and turning, just like a dead leaf in the wind would. It's really remarkable. And there's the moth that it becomes, which is pretty cool, but it's can't compare with that caterpillar. This is a specialist on peas, members of the pea family. And oh my God, talk about photo subjects. It's a big caterpillar too. You wouldn't miss it, but I don't find very many of them. Good old black locust, that tree is everywhere. This is where they seem to usually be. Here's a shed tarantula skin mimic for you, a monkey slug. And that's what it's trying to look like. And you go, well, we don't have tarantulas. Why would it look like that? Well, you got to think much, much longer term than this in this world. The evolutionary origin of this group of moths, or at least parts thereof, is in the tropics. The migratory birds that would generally eat that, they're neotropical migrants wintering down where there are tarantulas. So they probably know what those are, and apparently no one wants to eat an old dead skin of a tarantula. This is in trees around you. It's very common, another of our slugs, and it looks like it came off a coral reef or something. It's really remarkable. Stinging rose caterpillar, looks like a sea slug of some sort. It's well named. It'll sting you if you handle it. It's pretty common. There's the Supropia again. It's hard to beat that. That's just a crazy looking thing. White dotted prominent. This is mostly an oak specialist, but not entirely. By the way, one way that we really up our game with finding caterpillars, these are all found at night. Virtually all these shots are taken at night. A UV flashlight. They make these black light flashlights. A lot of these bioluminesce under those. They glow purple. It's really remarkable to see this. So it just greatly enhances your ability to find caterpillars at night. And that's how a lot of these were found. Anyway, there's a white dotted prominent eating a black oak leaf, kind of normal looking, but if you disturb it like a bird would, it immediately rears up. And just like the cobra coming out of the basket and starts swaying back and forth, and it bares its mandibles to create the effect of a scary eye. Their face, and those aren't its eyes at all. And that's clearly bird defense, visual predator defense, to ward them off. If the bird keeps pushing at it, it'll do that. It'll coil up like a snake and throw its head over the top, the loop. It's just totally remarkable. And this is part of that long-term warfare with birds, because birds are huge predators of caterpillars. This one takes it to an audio level, one of the few caterpillars that does. It's a Walnut Sphinx, and that's mostly what they eat, big caterpillar. and it makes sounds. So it has little air holes down the side like most caterpillars do. They're called spiracles. This one can force air out of those under such pressure, it creates a loud squeaking sound. You can hear it a few feet away, 5 feet or so. And at the same time, it thrashes violently back and forth. That's clearly a bird defense thing. A lot of birds will just say, that's enough of that, go find something easier and leave it alone. It's this desperate attempt to get through the predatorial gauntlet. And most don't succeed. On average, caterpillars probably suffer about a 99% mortality rate. It's why they're so fecund, the females. And by that, I just mean they lay lots of eggs, maybe several thousand eggs, because they have to get a few of these back to the reproductive stage. So anytime you see something like that, they're hugely important to the food chain because they're fueling so many other things. That's why their mortality is so high. But it all evolved like that, to be that way. Here's some crazy defense. This is a Harris's 3-spot caterpillar, which alternately looks like a spider from certain angles, a bird dropping other ways, but it's got those flails. So caterpillars go through about 5 molts, let's say, in general. And every time this one molts, the old hard head capsule, which is like a football helmet, sticks to those long hairs, or setae, they're called, at the above the head. And so when a wasp or fly, a parasitoid one, tries to lay their eggs on this, that's a really, really common fate for a caterpillar, to be eaten alive by the grubs of a wasp or a fly. Anyway, it feels that and instantly whips them with the football helmets and just knocks them right off its body. If it does make it through all this, that's what it becomes. Just one of our more bizarre looking moths. This is the same principle, just done with the anal prolegs. So all but inchworm caterpillars have 3 sets of legs. You can see them there on the right, behind the head. Then 4 sets of thicker, more powerful legs in the middle. Those are called the medial prolegs. Then they have 1 set of anal prolegs, the rearmost legs. In this case, those anal prolegs are modified into flails or whips. And same thing, bug lands on that, trying to lay eggs, forget about it. It just whips it right off of its body. So, and there's many other defenses. I won't go into all those, bore you with that, but the most common way, probably most caterpillars try and avoid all the predators, at least the birds, are crypsis, just blending in, camouflage, looking like their surroundings, and they do it really well. So most caterpillars are nocturnal. During the day, they sit like this, and this is to avoid the daytime predators like birds and the flies and wasps. They're safer if they come out at night when most of those aren't active. Anyway, the small-eyed Sphinx caterpillar even has dappled reddish pigment on its body to match the necrotic tissue of, in this case, an ironwood, which is in fall becoming dappled as well as parts of the leaves die. This is a specialist on elm leaves, are 2 common species of elms, the red elm or slippery elm, and then the American elm. In the back of the caterpillar has serrations that look like the serrations on the elm leaves. It's a big caterpillar, but really, really hard to spot these things. They blend in so well. This blends in even better. It's another leaf edge mimic and eats a variety of plants. Here it's on a black maple, checker fringe prominent, and it just becomes one with the leaf to a remarkable degree. It's incredibly hard to spot these things out there. That, again, is bird defense stuff, visual predator defense. Just make it so you can't see them. And the good old inchworms. This is about the biggest group of moths that we have, the Geometridae, the inchworms. We've probably all seen them. They don't have those 4 legs in the middle. So they do that looping gait when they locomote. But a lot of the inchworms are twig mimics par excellence. Look at that. I mean, it just sits there like that all day long. Even has little spots on it to match the lenticels, or the little white spots on the bark of whatever it's sitting on. This could take the cake, though, for all mimicry, at least of the Ohio species. It's really common if you grow any sunflowers or black-eyed Susans, purple cone flowers in your garden. You probably got these, the camouflaged looper. And it's right there for you to see, but it's probably hard to see. It's that. The head is at the top. It actually adorns its body with flower bits from whatever it is it's eating, in this case, blazing star. And that's how oftentimes people become familiar with these is they see the flowers start moving, and voila, it's this little caterpillar, which becomes a beautiful little lime green moth. Well, so important are all these caterpillars in getting this message out about the role of native plants in hosting all these caterpillars, that they are the biggest group of herbivores by far, fueling so many other things. This was taken from Algonquin, their southern forests, which are much like our forests, and it's the comparative biomass in a woodland community. A moose is down at the bottom. You can hardly see it. That would be a white-tailed deer with us. So just to visually illustrate this with us, if you took all the 500,000 white-tailed deer in Ohio or whatever, made a big pile of them, went out in early September, when caterpillar mass is at its greatest, somehow could get all those in Ohio, that their pile would dwarf the deer pile. It's huge. And yet no one knows anything about them, hardly. So they really make the world go around in natural communities. And that's because they're food. They're nature's hot dogs running around, being eaten by tons of things. Because of the effect they have on plants too. That's another interesting thing. Plants don't want to be eaten by caterpillars. They practice better living through chemistry. So many of those compounds in plants are there to ward off herbivory, and that's mostly caterpillars. We've made masses of uses of those. Many of our pharmaceuticals come from those chemicals. Rubber originally it's now synthesized, but that's a compound in rubber plants to gum up caterpillar mouth parts, and on it goes. So the human condition is really dependent on these things occurring, and has been for a long time. And then if you're into birds, like a lot of us, it's absolutely vital, especially to songbirds, to have all these caterpillars from moths running around out there. So the predation pressures are really, really intense. That's shifted caterpillars by and large to a nocturnal lifestyle, just like the moths, because there's less predators at night, basically. Much of that being driven by birds, which are really effective predators. By the way, that's a little slug moth on there glowing under a UV light. That's what they look like they've been plugged in. It really helps you find them. So Ohio birds, I just want to finish with this because I really think it's an important message, and one we're using that book in part to get across. But of all the breeding species in Ohio, that's about 180 species, half of them depend on caterpillars for their life cycle. And a lot of those are mostly dependent on caterpillars. And nearly all of them need them when they have young in the nest. So even sparrows that are vegan most of the year, when they have chicks in the nest, they start stuffing them full of caterpillars because they need the protein, and caterpillars are really easily assimilated little soft bags of protein. So incredibly important to have this going on if you like birds. Here's a worst case scenario if you are a caterpillar. This would be Freddy Krueger coming at you. This is the most common neotropical bird in the state of Ohio, breeding bird. They winter in South America, way, way down there. Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, places like that. But I have Michigan stat here for some reason, but about 1 million red-eyed vireos colonize Ohio every year, and they're mostly eating caterpillars. This one I caught in the act. He's looking at the underside of a leaf above him because that's where caterpillars often hide during the day, and they eat a lot of them. Very, very conservative estimate in Ohio would be, I don't know, 50, 70 million caterpillars every single day that the red-eyed vireos are with us, just this one species. It throws in how common these things are into some scale when you look at that. Little golden crown kinglets, they come back very early when the little inchworms are just emerging and hatching out in the springtime. And golden crown kinglets winter in northern latitudes like Ohio, and they're doing it off caterpillars. They're very good at finding the inchworms that overwinter as caterpillars and eating them. They don't eat any vegetation, or very little at least. And then in spring migration, one reason the cuckoos are late migrants, often not returning into June even, is because they're big birds, bigger than robins, and they're waiting for the caterpillar crop to get going, and get bigger and grow to some size. And then the yellow-billed like this and the black-billed cuckoos start to return. Like I said, even birds like that, rose-breasted grosbeak with that big vegetation eating bill, and Vesper sparrows and all the other sparrows in Ohio, don't normally eat caterpillars. They're eating a lot of vegetation until the chicks are in the nest. Then they really switch to caterpillars for their offspring. But warblers are probably the favorite of many birders, at least, if not most, of the songbird groups. And they're really not our birds. Warblers, 38 species return to Ohio every year or migrate through Ohio, many 25 of them staying to breed here. And it's this massive seasonal invasion from the tropics to exploit our protein sources, in large part grown by our native plants in the form of caterpillars. Of course, that's very seasonal, so they have to leave. So they make these long journeys, several thousand miles one way in some cases, to raise their young up here. They get out of the tropics and all the competition down there, come up here, take advantage, and get back down there. These are not our birds. They're down there, usually longer than they are with us. Here's a pine warbler that I just shot earlier a few weeks ago in Clear Creek. And that's a well-named bird. They specialize on pine trees, but pines have their own host of larvae. Dave Wagner loaned me this. I have yet to find one of these because they're so hard, but they're not rare. So a lot of the zowie caterpillars and others are pine needle mimics. So pine warblers are slow, methodical feeders. If you ever watch them, they have to be. You can't rush through the needle fascicles and expect to find things like that. But they've got a lock on a specialty item. That's what they depend on. But all these other warblers, like common yellowthroat, one of our most common species, chestnut-sided warbler, foraging here in emerging oaks, which would already have caterpillars, early inchworms emerging. Golden-winged warblers, look at that sharp, tiny little bill. They specialize in caterpillars that tend to hide in leaves, and they pry the leaf open. Kentucky warbler, a beautiful species of woodland understory. Mourning warbler, this was shot in northern Michigan, rare breeder with us, but we get them in migration. Nashville warbler here in grape leaves. Grapes are wonderful hosts for caterpillars, all half dozen species we have. And here he's using his bill to pry open a bivouac that a caterpillar made to hide in there, and he's going to pull it out. They're very good at finding them. Here's a northern Perilla, our smallest warbler, in early April, or mid-April, after it just got back, with a little inchworm in its bill. It's already finding them. Worm-eating warbler, a horribly named bird because it would never eat worms, it's eating caterpillars. Named at a time when entomological ignorance was greater, and just anything like that was called a worm, but it's really the caterpillar eating warbler. And on it goes. So all these warblers, or at least the vast majority, are utterly dependent on this seasonal crop of caterpillars. And if somehow the caterpillars all disappeared, or all our forests shifted over to non-native species, non-natives not supporting hardly any caterpillars, our forests would fall silent. We'd lose beauties like that. Yellow-throated warbler specializes on all the caterpillars that are on sycamore trees. And then the cerulean warbler, a poster child for declining neotropical warblers. 80% of the populations disappeared in the last 50 years. So the upshot of my book, and really this whole interest in photographing moths, this talk in part, is these 3 points. We have to manage for native flora because it grows insects, especially moth caterpillars, and songbirds and many other things are so reliant on those that we lose them without all this going on. And photos were hugely helpful in me sharing this message, which I have many times through talks, and when this book comes out, that book. All right, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. That was great.
I'm just trying to stop this share. There you go. Should have it back.
I know there were a couple questions in the chat, and I know I myself had a couple questions, but does anybody else want to go first? I know there was one, and I can't remember who asked this one, sorry, but it was, what's the best time of year to photograph moths?
Great question. Best time of year for the moths themselves is probably June through September. just to be very rough about it. But there are moths that fly all months of the year. There's winter moths that if you get a day in the 40s in January, they'll come out and start flying.
Wow.
So if you turn your nightlight on around your house, even on a warm winter day, you might well get moths. But the big glut of them it's a summertime and fall phenomenon mostly. A little less so in spring.
So I have a question. You know, and you were talking about the flora in the state and that type of thing. And you mentioned at the very beginning, one of the lilies, is it the star lily?
Golden star.
Okay. And what is it, you know, that endangers, that's probably the wrong word, but the natural flora like that, why is that becoming kind of a rarity here? Is it just, you know, development of land, or what is it?
In the case of the golden star specifically,
or just any of the flora that
okay.
you know, you talk about that being important for this whole cycle.
Yeah. Okay. The biggest reasons for flora decline is habitat destruction.
Yeah.
Now, if I wanted to even get specific, I ruffle a feather or two here probably, but it's agriculture. 2/3 of Ohio is glaciated. That turned out to be some of the most fertile soils in the Americas. All of that almost is converted to agriculture. So for instance, our prairies, which had a whole host of moths, 99.9% of those have been destroyed. Following that is urbanization, but that's far back from agriculture. So that's the biggest culprit right there. In terms of rarity, I mean, being rare enough to be on ODNR's official list of rare, that's 1/3 of our 1,800 plants that are state listed rarities. A big reason for that is edge of range. So you might go somewhere else, like Arkansas, in the case of that golden star, and they're if not common, much more findable there than they would be here on the very edge of its range. But then again, habitat loss is another big factor. Our peatlands, which we used to have, bogs and fens, 92% or so have been destroyed. And consequently, all those bogs plants have become really rare too.
Is that
So,
destroyed due to development?
peat harvesting and development for agriculture. But peat harvesting at one time had a sizable role in that. And then just draining of wetlands. You know, Ohio's lost 90% of its wetlands too. I don't mean to be a gloomy Gus about that. This is just reality. We have lost a lot of habitat, and that's made our plants rare. That's why their conservation is so important. Planting hostas and daylilies in the yard is by no means going to replace these processes, because there's no coevolutionary history with non-native flora in these things that eat them. Other than deer don't mind, they'll eat anything, especially your lilies, but that's not true with most things. Caterpillars have a chemical connection that they've evolved over eons with certain plants, and non-natives will not fill that bill.
Okay.
I saw-
Anybody else? Sue, I know you had a question that you put in the chat, Sue.
Yes, Jim, I was wondering if when you shot the moth, the face of the moth straight on, was that super zoom, or are those cropped also, your shots?
They're all going to be cropped to a degree, probably, but not a whole lot. So, you know, one good way, which many of you know, I'm sorry, a lot of people here know more about photography than I do, but a good way to increase depth of field is just move back from your subject and then later crop in. This is the one thing about great about 45 megapixel sensors on cameras these days, is you can do a lot more cropping. So I'm doing a combination. A lot of times I don't get as close as I could because I want that depth of field even greater than f/16, and then I just crop in later. Run pretty close to everything, you know.
And does your flash scare them?
Yeah. No, almost never. Doesn't phase them. Moths don't see like we see. A lot of them, they're just almost photoreceptors. They're detecting dark light, and it doesn't. It very rarely would affect one.
Thank you.
Good questions. Jared, I see he's got one. I'll just read it because I pulled the chat up.
Okay.
Who, by the way, he is a fantastic photographer who's taught me much of what I know about flash. But anyway, Jared asks about that Moth Caterpillar I showed. If you remember that, I said I had a little racing stripe and it was spiny and lime green. He's got a sharp eye because he noticed there were parasitoid wasps on that. And I didn't talk about them just because I can really go off on a lot of side channels with these talks. So I really have to like put blinders on. But yes, Jared, definitely there were 2 little parasitoids. They would have come right out of that caterpillar. So it's a walking dead caterpillar. There's probably many other wasp grubs inside of it, eating it alive. This is a super common fate for a caterpillar, where these flies and wasps lay eggs on them. The little grubs bore right into the host and eat it alive, and cleverly avoid all the most important components to keep it alive as long as they possibly can till they're ready to burst out. And that's exactly what happened there. Good eye to see those. Okay, anyone else?
Got a quiet group here tonight. Well, it's making me want to make sure I'm not going to bed at 9 o'clock this summer. Getting out and looking. I'm just shocked, I guess, at all of the ones you're able to find. And I have one question, and this is probably just kind of a silly question. So many of these, like particularly when you're looking head on into the face and that type of thing, were any of these quote unquote, and I don't mean it necessarily in the literal sense, but staged? Like, would you put a stick anywhere sometime or whatever to attract them? Or are all of these you finding out in the wild and just searching for them? Or
The
were you able
caterpillars
to-
or the,
Hmm?
is that the caterpillars or the moths? I'm sorry.
Well, both actually, but there were a lot of the moths where you had just really these beautiful head-on shots that were gorgeous. And I mean, how do you, number one, get yourself into the position of that, or did you attract them in some ways to be able to get shots like that?
Yeah, we posed those. So they came
Yeah.
into sheets, most likely,
Okay.
in most cases, to the lights. And then we have all kinds of little tricks. So we usually have a bunch of sticks laying around because we know this is going to happen. So we have good perches for them. And we just put them on the perch. And at our finest, I've got a friend, some of you know, named John Howard. I do a lot of work with John. He's in Adams County, one of the most knowledgeable naturalists in the state. But anyway, John sometimes will bring a whole table out, a card table. We set up card tables. We got those little spongy pads you can stick things in, whatever those are called. So we'll stick sticks in those. We got all this going on. We have chairs, you know, you don't even have to stand. You can sit, and we pose our subjects and people cycle through. We just take turns shooting all these things. So, you know, they'll usually not fly away. So yeah, we'll sometimes go to great lengths to make that easier on ourselves. I should say, and I didn't in the talk, no one dies here, all right? That's a rule of thumb with me. Even bugs, no one dies. So when we're done, we turn the sheets off before it gets light. Otherwise, the birds are going to have a feast. And we shake them out and everyone flies back into the dark forest, you know? So we're not killing them or doing anything like that, but we do work with them to make life easier and get shots like that.
Cool.
One other thing I should mention, it's hard to get into, but there's an event. If you Google it, you'll go right to the site, but Mothapalooza. And it's in its, I don't know, 11th or 12th year, but it's already full. It's like 175 people, but it fills up in a few days when it's announced. So this year's is already full, but keep it in mind for next year, because there'll be a lot of experts. You'll get on, you'll be able to do a lot of those kind of shots if you make it into that. It's in Southern Ohio.
Cool. Any other questions, guys? Comments?
Oh, Amelia had one. I'm sorry, I missed it. She asked, I think if I interpret her right, how did I get the blur behind me right now? That's a zoom function. There's some, forget now how you do. You go over to start video. Yeah, start video, hit the little arrow, and you get a pull up menu. And one of the options is blur my background. So that's how you do that, if that was what your question was.
Do some of these moths come at different times of the night, like, you know, toward dawn or toward midnight?
If I could give you a prize, I would do it for the maybe the best question. Yes, there is a sequence as the night wanes. So the big silk moths, that's what most people, at least when they're newer to this, they really want to see those lunas and all those big spectacular ones, midnight and later, often 1 a.m. and later. Very rarely see them before then. So yes, there is a sequence of emergence during the night. I don't know why that is. So one thing we often do, we'll run out of steam maybe at 1 a.m. or something. So you go back in and sleep, and then you come out at 4 a.m. and see what happened in those 3 hours. There's often a dramatic difference. And then after you check all that out, that's when you turn the lights off and scare them all back into the woods and shut everything down before it gets light. So yes, big silk moths, midnight and later.
Jim, how long do they stay on those sheets that you light up? Do they fly there and then leave, or you tell me?
Some do. Some will just come in. Some are short-term visitors. A lot of times they don't even pause long enough for photos. Some will stay all night until you scare them physically back off the sheet when you're done and get them out of there. One of the big problems with moth populations is light pollution, because it acts as a sink, like the big powerful street lights where they come into that light sphere, but no one's turning those lights off or scaring them away before it gets light. And it takes them out of the breeding pool. But we don't do that here. But yeah, some stay all night. Here's another. Oh, okay. Here's a question, Jared. Is it true that male Promethean moths begin their flight in the evening, full light still available? What is the explanation? Are they mimicking distasteful butterflies like spice bushes, or more likely pipe vines? That's very true. It makes them incredibly hard to photograph. As a matter of fact, Chelsea and I probably produced 98%, 99% of the photos for that book. That was one we had to borrow from a guy, Chris Zacharias in Dayton, because they're so hard to find, the male Promethean moths. Neither of us had done it, so we didn't have photos of that because of that diurnal habit of daylight flight for the males. So you know what they really look like are morning cloak butterflies in flight. So if you see a weird looking morning cloak in the early evening flying around, it could be one of these male Promethean moths. And there's some other moths that have weird quirks to their behavior that makes them really hard to find and photograph. That's certainly one of them.
If you said this before, excuse me, but what's the lifespan of a moth? And do they travel like it always surprised me, the distances that monarchs travel, for example. And I mean, do they travel distances and go places? What's their lifespan? Yep.
Some do, some don't. Some are probably very provincial, you know, just staying in the same small area for their whole life cycle. Some, like the armyworms, are notorious for this. Armyworm moths, they migrate like birds, so much so that they'll even show up on radar, weather radar at night, these patches. The most dramatic example I personally saw of that was one night we were mothing. It was really good, a lot of stuff. Did that 4 a.m. check after some sleep. At 4 a.m., the sheet and all the walls around it were covered with thousands of adult armyworm moths who had clearly been flying over, saw the light, and came down into it. Wow. So and then you get more localized migration. Another famous one is the black witch. That's the biggest moth that turns up in Ohio. They don't generally reproduce here, although that might be changing. But they're huge, the size of bigger than any of our bats, and they're tropical, and they'll make it. Hurricanes will help push those north, and it's a rarity with us. But we get home and they're coming thousands of miles. You know, one turned up at Churchill, Manitoba once, if you know where that is, the polar bear capital of the world on Hudson Bay.
Wow,
that moth had to have gone 6,000 to 8,000 miles.
Oh my gosh.
So yes, you definitely get some migration, but mostly it would be a much more localized thing than the examples I mentioned. All right.
There's one other question. What was that, Jared? Some butterflies overwinter as adults, morning cloak, angle wings, etc. What types of moths do the same? Mostly micro moths.
Yeah, I don't know if it's mostly well, probably if we really understood mostly micro moths for everything. We just don't know them that well. A lot of the sallows, if you're familiar with that word, sallows are a big group of moths, or at least some of those do. There's a famous one, Morrison sallow, that I learned on a night when it was in the 30s, and I'm seeing moths fly around. I couldn't believe it. It turned out to be Morrison sallow, and there's some belief that they kind of sync with our emergence with the sugar maple sap running, tree sap running on warm days or whatever. But I would say it's more that group of type of moths, sallows, and maybe some of the darts, things like that, that might overwinter. But a fair number of them do overwinter as moths. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Jim.
Oh, glad to do it. Thanks for
Great talk.
having me.
Hmm?
Thanks for having me.
Great talk. Always enjoy it, having you here. Anything else, anybody, before we sign off? All right. Well, good to see everyone. Thank you again. I'm inspired.
Excellent. Thanks, Pam.
All right.
Okay.
See you guys.
Thanks.
See you soon. All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
All right.
Good night.